Our final speaker today will be Big Ten Commissioner Jim Delany. Delany is beginning his 23rd year as Commissioner of the Big Ten Conference. He has led the Big Ten through significant periods of change and growth that have helped the conference maintain its preeminent position as one of the nation's leaders in providing quality athletic and academic experiences for young people. We'll have Commissioner Delany make an opening statement and then open the floor to questions.
Good afternoon. It's nice to be back up here again. Gives me a reason to allow my wife to take me out and get a new suit, new pair of shoes, try to look good. Beginning of football season is always kickoff luncheon, so it's great to be around the coaches and the media that cover us so extensively. You know, I really think that the past year and the next 2 years are probably some of the most interesting, exciting, and challenging years that I can recall. This is going into my 33rd year as a conference commissioner. Before that, I spent 5 years in enforcement, and a few years before that, I spent time as a student athlete. And so either as a student athlete or as a young lawyer or as a conference commissioner, I think we're in interesting and challenging times, and I hope that I can put into perspective some of the challenges, some of the possible ways through those challenges, hopefully be honest about the good and also about the things that are not so good that we need to address. But before getting into that, I think, you know, it's important to point out that we've got 5 individuals who will be honored in December in New York City, who will be inducted into College Football Hall of Fame. Lloyd Carr from Michigan, Gene Washington from Michigan State, Sandy Stevens, Will Shields from Nebraska. Sandy was a great quarterback at Minnesota, led them to the Rose Bowl, and Eddie George from Ohio State. And that brings, counting University of Chicago and Penn State and Nebraska, to 167 student athletes in the Hall of Fame, as well as 53 coaches. So we're really proud of those contributions. You know, it seems to me the things that we have done well require partnerships and trust, and certainly our telecast partners at ESPN, ABC, and the Big Ten Network, as well as Big Fox over the air, you know, are going to bring to our fans all games in HD and all on national television this year. And that's a real expansion. I think Mark mentioned we'll have 7 games on BTN and Prime and 7 on ESPN. Well, 22 years ago, 1989, I think we had a total of 15 or 16 games on all forms of television. So there's no doubt about it that the kinds of change in the media platforms and technology have aided in the growth of college sports. And to be honest with you, we wouldn't be where we are here today without those kinds of partnerships. Likewise, the changes that have occurred in the conference, whether it's the addition of Penn State or Nebraska, require trust and change and taking advantage of opportunities. And clearly, those 2 institutions have brought the Big Ten into the modern era. We'll have a championship game this year. We'll have divisional play, something we've never had before. And I would tell you that when you look up and down that schedule, if I were a coach, I'm glad I'm an administrator, but if I were a coach, I would be just you know, really getting my guys ready to play, because it's a cliche, but I think the competition will be at its highest level ever. As far as the regular season, we have the best regular season. I don't think anybody questions that. And I don't think anybody questions that college football has separated itself. Certainly the NFL is the most popular sport in America by a long shot, and they've earned it and they deserve it. But college football, for a variety of reasons over the last decade, has really separated itself from college basketball, pro baseball, pro basketball, and hockey. It really is the second most important and viewed sport in the country. That brings great opportunity, but also great challenges. And so I think our challenge in the future is to address the things that are addressable. As far as the postseason is concerned, the BCS is controversial. It's successful, and it's also controversial. And that's not going to change anytime soon. We have 3 years to go in that contract. The Rose Bowl is associated with the BCS. The Rose Bowl is the most important external relationship we have, and we want to maintain it indefinitely into the future. And we'll work with our partners in other conferences around the country to continue to study it and continue to try to do what's right for the postseason. But I know that in playing SEC teams and Big 12 teams and Pac-10 teams, that the end of the season is a great celebration of college football for us. But it's not any greater or more important than the regular season that we all enjoy from September through November. I would repeat that the challenges we have over the next couple years are significant, and they really, relate to two areas. One is our structure and our systems, and we've had structure and systems from the beginning of the establishment of college sports. But I'm talking about eligibility standards, standards governing recruitment, definitions of scholarships, and the actual regulatory system that's in place. It could probably fairly be described as a system established in the 50s and stuck in the 70s. And I think that there's going to be a need to really look at it seriously, upgrade it for the 21st century, so that we're going to be able to continue to put forward teams sponsored by institutions of higher education without being embarrassed by the actions that occur off the field, not on the field, because I think the actions on the field are entertaining and exciting and worthwhile. But I think the system, as well as the people that are engaged on behalf of the institutions. I spent about an hour this morning with 12 football coaches, and they had an opportunity to hear my comments, and I had an opportunity to look them in the eye, because there are two things that are in play here. Systems, which need to be refined and upgraded for the 21st century, and I want to hear what they have to say about how those can be improved, how systems can be simplified, how rules can be simplified, how we can work on behalf of the student athlete, how we can produce a high school student that's better prepared for the college experience, and also how people can be held more accountable in a clearer and more rational and timely way. I read with a lot of interest Mike Slive's comments. I think he laid out a number of areas that I have no disagreement with at all. I read John Swafford's comments. John called it a tipping point. I agree with that. Mike said we've lost trust. I agree with that. Mark Emmert has done a great job in the last 4 or 5 months, meeting with us, meeting with others in the collegiate system, and starting in the Final Four all the way through the commissioners' meetings in D.C., and really has solicited ideas and comments. He's asked us to be proactive. He's asked us to communicate with our coaches and our presidents, and we recognize that systems aren't the answer by themselves, and people aren't the answer by themselves. But I think that going forward, and I think it's going to be a great challenge for presidential leadership, not only at the NCAA, but within the conferences, and more particularly with regard to the people side of it. Our coaches need to commit. And I believe our coaches are committed. I've always had confidence in our coaches. Coach Tressel made a mistake, and he paid dearly for that mistake. The University of Michigan had a problem with out-of-season practice. That was embarrassing. This year, we have Ohio State getting ready to go in front of the Infractions Committee on August 12th. That's embarrassing. Neither one of those institutions have a history of being in that situation. It not only reflects poorly on them, but it has reflected poorly on us. And I explained to each of those coaches that going forward, we do not want 2 more such cases, and that they are the CEOs of their program. They hire the assistant coaches. People do make mistakes, but it's how those mistakes are managed and how people address those that's more important than the underlying mistake. We have hundreds of self-reported violations in the Big Ten annually. That information goes from the coaches in some cases to the school, or from the compliance director to the school, to the conference, to the NCAA. That's how we manage that. The NCAA has a significant role to play also. They have an infractions process. They have a regulatory system that basically where they are enforcing our rules. They aren't their rules. They're rules that come out of the NCAA membership. And to the extent that they're inexplicable or irrational, it's not the NCAA's problem, it's our problem. And we need to fix it if we need to fix it. We can't blame other people for our problems, and we have some. I think that the 14 institutions that have come under scrutiny in the last year raise legitimate questions in people's minds about who's sponsoring these programs and what do these programs stand for. I can't remember a period of time where we've had more questions about various programs, whether it be on the agent side, the recruitment side, or the academic side. And we've had 2 of them in this conference, and that's too many as far as I'm concerned. So what I wanted to do with our coaches this morning is make clear to them what our expectations are. I am very confident in each of those people, as I have been in the past. Sometimes you get disappointed. But the reality is not about getting disappointed, it's about getting better and getting stronger. So I'm very pleased that Mark Emmert is in the position he's in. I think he's a great communicator. I think as a former president at LSU, UConn, and Washington, he understands major college athletics, both their strengths and their weaknesses. But it's not the NCAA alone that needs to change, it's the conferences and the institutions to really look at their processes so that we can trust each other, that when information comes up and needs to be addressed, it's addressed in the proper way. Because it's not the fact that we're highly regulated, it's not the fact that people are going to get mistakes that gets us in trouble. It's how we deal with those problems as they arise. So I'm pretty excited really about the opportunity to address these things going forward. I can tell you that there's been a lot of discussion about what can change. And as I mentioned earlier, I thought Commissioner Slive 4 areas were well stated. And I wouldn't disagree with any of them. We'll have to get into the details like you do on a lot of things. But I know that our presidents, we've discussed these things at our recent meetings, as have our ADs, coaches, and faculty. And they're prepared for change, and they're prepared to engage in change. We compete with the Big 12, the Pac-10, the SEC on the field. This is not a time for competition. This is a time for collaboration, for coming together, for giving Mark Emmert the ideas and concepts that he needs to present to university presidents around the country and to establish a renewed way of ensuring that the intercollegiate athletic model can be sustained in the 21st century. It is a real challenge, and it's one that I believe that we're up to. But it will be, I'll be up here next year, and I'll be up here the year after, and we'll determine exactly how much constructive change is possible. I would note that college football continues to draw incredible support from the media. With the Pac-10's announcement of its new networks, that's another indication of the value and the interest that the public has in college football. Larry's a good friend, and I want to compliment he and his team for being so creative to structure not only a great regular season package, but also a postseason package. And while we compete, we also collaborate. They're a partner, and we're proud that they were able to establish their niche in the college-owned network marketplace. Talking about networks, there's been a lot of controversy about networks and what role they should play outside the telecasting of collegiate events. Mark just gave you his take on it. I will tell you that when we created this network, we wanted to do it in a way that was profitable and in a way that also expressed the best values of the conference. And as a result, there's a commitment to equity in terms of telecasting events. There's a no alcohol policy, and there's a commitment to institutional programming. It was not created to telecast high school sports. It has been discussed, and at a time when we're trying to clean up, whether it be summer basketball or whether it's 7-on-7 football, and try to deconstruct the recruitment model to make it a little bit saner and a little bit more enforceable and a little bit more accountable. In my view, it's not the time for the Big Ten Network to engage in the coverage of high school sports. Maybe it's a recruiting advantage, maybe it's not, but that's not why that network was created. And so therefore, while we go through this reform process and while we try to sort out the best ways of doing business, it's going to be the Big Ten Conference's position inside the joint venture with Fox that we refrain from telecasting high school games for at least the next couple of years until we sort out these other more important issues. If in the NCAA in its wisdom makes these games televisable, we'll probably have to look at it. But it's our position that that does nothing but confuse an already confused environment, and we're going to stick to the collegiate telecasting of games. So with that, let me stop here and just say it's great to be here, and look forward to trying to answer some of your questions.
All right, we'll take the first question here on the aisle, and then we'll move down in front here.
Jim, two things. First, to clarify, the meeting you had this morning with the coaches, I assume you don't have every year. This was a special circumstance given everything that's been going on lately?
Yeah, we meet with the coaches a number of other times during the course of the year. We had full-day meetings in May with them. I probably spent 4 or 5 hours, but I wanted to call them together today and speak to them candidly and from the heart, explain to them that in many ways the game is as healthy as it has ever been, but also, in my view, that we have, as a conference, been hurt by the two institutions that have been involved in NCAA allegations and findings, and that I wanted to let them know that I expected them to lead their programs in a way that wouldn't put us in that circumstance again, and I felt very comfortable with a very candid reaction. I think everybody understands where we're going and why we're going in that direction.
And secondly, in your opening, you said there's some systems that need refined and upgraded to the 21st century. I'm wondering if you're inferring that you're open to the idea of paying players?
I'm not open. That depends on how you define that. I'm open to providing scholarships up to the cost of education. That's a defined cost. It's got defined elements. I'm not interested in looking at any scholarship that would provide for more than the cost of education, which is basically room, board, fees, course-related required materials, miscellaneous, and local expenses. So in most cases, it's a couple $1,000s to $4,000 or $5,000 above the present cost of education, the present scholarship definition. So a lot of people talk about pay for play. If you define that as anything more than the cost of education, we would not be interested in discussing it. To the extent it's contained or limited to the cost of education, would be interested in having that discussion.
Next question down here in front.
Jim, point by point, I wonder if you did you agree with everything Mike Slive said last week in Birmingham?
Well, I think I didn't see the transcript, but as it was reported, there was nothing that Dennis said I really disagreed with. I think he talked about the student-athlete welfare. There are a couple things I would add to it, but there's nothing that he put forward that I would disagree with. The one thing that I would like for us to think seriously about is we have athletic excellence as a precondition to being invited to a bowl game or to be invited to the NCAA tournament or track and field. And I really agree with Arnie Duncan, and I also agree with the Knight Commission, that there ought to be some minimal academic, team performances in order to have that eligibility, to order to have that team be eligible for postseason play.
Those, as Mike said, those all, and you said, those all seem like great ideas.
Mm-hmm.
But as you just stated, how do you get a consensus on that
Yep.
to change the model?
Yes.
If it is on the membership to do it.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a challenge, and I think, I think all we can do is come together, and I think, Dan and Larry and John Swafford, Mike and I, John Marinato, have had, these ideas have been discussed in general ways, not in any specific way. And I think some of us will have an easier time getting internal consensus, but assuming we got internal consensus, then we've got to come together as a group. And then I think Mark Emmert has got to, help us inside the NCAA. I think it's a real challenge for presidential leadership because, how we're reported on, both good and bad, is different. Our great games and our great performances and great coaching is, reported in bold print and HD and 3D, and that comes with the territory. When we don't do well, it's reported on in the same bold way. And so both on the upside and on the downside, we're a little bit different. And that means the system has got to be adjusted to accommodate some of our challenges. Toledo and San Diego both had very significant and difficult challenges. I mean, the thing that I fear the most is the compromising of the games, and they were just covered in probably a less comprehensive way because they're not household names. They are not brand names, and the coverage of them is going to reflect that. And so with, a lot of high visibility comes even higher responsibility. And I think the system that we have was created in a day when that wasn't maybe quite the case. And so, I feel no competition at all. I'm a pretty competitive guy on a lot of issues. But with regard to reform and change, I'm looking for allies. I'm looking for people to walk the walk with. And I'm hoping that Mark can be influential with the presidents to help us. We want to be inside the NCAA. We want to share the revenue. We want to have tournaments and championships to include everybody, but we also need a way of governance that allows us to evolve with the challenges of the time.
Next question is all the way in the back on the stage left side.
Yeah. Jim, this follows up on what you were just saying there, but the conference commissioners seem to be taking a pretty active, I guess, leadership role with this agenda, if you will. And I'm wondering if that's a concerted effort or if this is kind of an evolution of the role of the conference commissioners or how you see it.
Well, it's happened from time to time. I can remember, and some of you who've been around a little bit longer probably remember the reform movements in the late 80s and early 90s where Commissioner Kramer, myself, Dave Gavitt, Gene Corrigan were involved with the President's Commission as well as after that in the early 90s. And so the conferences from time to time have been able to do this and coordinate and bring issues forward. We don't do it every year. For the most part, the tweaks in the system come from institutions or from NCAA committees. But I think, in every case, if you would look at the bylaws of the conferences, you would see statements about studying problems and challenges and proposing solutions. In the Big Ten, our board of directors is the final authority. At the NCAA, it's their board of directors. And so we have, the only thing we can do is bring ideas forward, try to work through solutions that are agreeable to ourselves, and then ask Mark to work inside the NCAA system to produce changes and results. We haven't evolved much, and I think that it's not all about systems. It's also about people and local culture. And so I don't put it all on the systems because, if you have a wrongdoer who's intent on doing wrong or makes a fundamental mistake, doesn't make any difference what kind of system you have. But at the same time, it doesn't make any sense in criminalizing activity that's not serious or core to your enterprise. And I think the other thing that I would tell you is that if you can't enforce it, and there are a lot of regulations that are unenforceable, they're simply on the books, it's probably not right to have them there. Call them guidelines or best practices, but don't call them regulations.
We have time for three more. We'll start over here, stage right.
Jim, hi. It's obviously a major hypothetical, but if Ohio State were to get a postseason bowl ban, how would that affect whether they'd be eligible for the Big Ten title game?
We don't have a conference policy on it. My sense would be the presidents would meet quickly and act on an athletic director's recommendation. My sense would be that anybody who is ineligible to play in postseason, whether it's in basketball and football, going forward would not be eligible, although I will tell you that I think Minnesota was allowed to play in our basketball tournament. It's a little bit different because there's so many bids that go to this conference in basketball, but in football, where you have one automatic access point for a BCS game, my sense would be you'd have to be eligible for that game in order to play in our championship game, because it's simply that's the reason we have the game, is to identify a champion and a representative into the postseason play. But that would be after discussion with ADs and a recommendation to presidents.
Next question is down here on the aisle in front of us.
Jim, when schools get into NCAA trouble for rules violations, we always hear that every case is different. You can't compare apples and oranges and so forth. But in the context of what's been going on in the last year with, as you mentioned, 12 different schools in trouble, and as you said, with high visibility comes even higher responsibility, do you see that how the NCAA Committee on Infractions handles a Hyatt States case as a litmus test on how open the NCAA is in terms of making the type of changes that you think might be necessary with the system that we're in?
You know, I've had the good fortune or bad fortune to be in front of the infractions committees over 40 times in the last 37 years. 10 as an investigator, about 10 times when I was in the Ohio Valley Conference, and then probably about 20 times in the last 22 years. So almost every time when one of our schools go, I'm along for the ride. I've also, studied the cases and looked at the cases, and the reality is, in any adjudicatory process, facts are stubborn things, and they're more malleable for some people, but in the court or in an administrative hearing, facts matter, findings matter, and I would tell you that, generally speaking, the outcomes that the committee gives are rational, on that day. They hear the evidence, they look at prior cases. They typically don't go back 10 or 20 years, but there's a series of cases. It's sort of like a basketball official. What you expect from a basketball official is maybe not to be as consistent in November as they are in December, but you would hope that they would be consistent from one call to another within a 5-minute period. And everybody argues in sports about the inconsistency of the strike zone, of the charge block. I think you could argue from time to time about the consistency of the infractions committee, but I would tell you that my experience has been is that the decisions are rational. Sometimes I think they're too tough. Sometimes I think they're too easy. Typically, I always think that, my school should be dealt with. I usually don't say they're dealt with too leniently. I usually think they're dealt with too toughly, but I'm not an objective observer. I don't fear that the infractions committee is going to be any more difficult this summer than they were last summer or the summer before. Joe Patuto, who is the former chair of that committee, recommended to the board of directors, I think it was two or three summers ago, that they reintroduce, television penalties, start using postseason bans, and they haven't really taken up that charge. I wouldn't be opposed if they do take up that charge, but I think that it's on the board of directors to address that. I don't think we're well served without the ability of the committee to deal with television bans or postseason play. And so I don't expect that there will be a change in policy until the board directs that change. And so I expect that we'll be dealt with fairly as we have in the past.
And our final question will be staged left down in front.
Just to build on the last couple of questions, what do you see as the Big Ten's role in approaching these situations? Is it to be advocating on behalf of member institutions, or is it to be, in some sense, punitive in conjunction with the NCAA, or maybe above and beyond when thought to be necessary? Yeah,
that's a good question. We're not in the enforcement business per se. No conference is. We do manage the educational area. We do manage expectations and how they deal with information, and we have for 20 years. In fact, the first year I was in, we insisted that people begin to report secondary violations. In that first year, I think we had 37 or 38. Today, we have over 250 a year, somewhere between 230 and 250 a year. So number one, we believe in, reveal and report. And we're pretty clear with our institutions that that's the foundation of how we want them to operate. They're the ones with the really extensive compliance and educational departments. Some have 6, 8, 10 people working all year round on these issues. When a school gets themselves in trouble with the NCAA, we're available to offer the university advice. Sometimes they don't ask for any advice. If they do, we provide them with advice. We're available to escort them to the hearing, but in all cases they've asked us to go. But if they didn't want us to go, they have their own internal legal counsel, or typically they have external legal counsel. They're the ones that are sitting with the president and the athletic director and the faculty representative. I'm typically at the far end of the meeting. The infractions committee usually asks me if I have any opening comments. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. And then at a day or two later, towards the end of the hearing, they'll ask me if I have any closing comments. Sometimes I do and sometimes I don't. So really, the presentation of the case to the NCAA is, I would describe as 95% institution dominated. And if a school asks me, sometimes they do and sometimes they don't, what do you think about how we're approaching it? I'll give them a comment. After the process is over, we have a process that reviews the infractions committee penalties, and I think that in 22 years, I can't remember an incident where we, added to those penalties. We typically accept those penalties. If we want to do something further on an educational side or counseling side, we could. But in terms of penalties, we typically have never added to the penalties that the NCAA imposes. So I view us as having fairly high expectations about, report and then reveal. And I believe that we've built a pretty good culture of that. I think that, Jim's activity was in contravention of that. I talked to our coaches this morning at length. I said, I want to make sure that everybody in this room understands when you come across certain kinds of information, you have a responsibility to report it up the chain of command. You do not have any discretion about that. They understand that. I think they have all understood it. And I believe they understood it even more going forward. So it was a good conversation. That's our expectation. And confident that that will be the way they all proceed going forward.
Thank you very much, Commissioner Delany. That concludes today's session.